Good morning, members and members of the public. Welcome to this meeting of the County Council Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. But if I could ask everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place, that would be very helpful. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. So if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave via the side doors to use the fire escape and make our way to the assembly point in the car park. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. We have one additional one to add, Michelle, but I'll come to you first.
Yeah. I've received apologies from councillors Wilson and Dupre, and Councillor Slatter is substituting for Councillor Wilson, but she's also in the middle of a service appeal, so she will be joining us when that's finished.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. Councillor Dupre was the one that was very short notice, so I was going to add that. So that's that item covered. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no hands, so we will move on. But if at any point anybody needs to declare an interest, please feel free to do so during the meeting. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee on the 28th of January as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? Thank you. I will sign those in a moment. We will move on to the updated action log, which is included in the public papers for this meeting. Are there any questions or comments on the action log? I see no hands, so we will move on to item 3, which is petitions and public questions. We have received no petitions or public questions. We will therefore move on to item 4, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring and Performance Report for period 9. The Head of Finance will introduce the report. Appendix C is confidential, so if any member wishes to discuss items relating that relate to Appendix C, we will need to move into confidential session. And if that is the case, I think we will move this item to the end of the agenda so that we can move into confidential session at that point. But I will assume, as I don't see hands waving at me, that we will continue in public session for now and hope that we don't need to discuss the confidential appendix in detail. So I will hand over to Stephen. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the consolidated management accounts for the council. It's actually as a period 10 of 2024-25, which is the end of January. It sets out the forecast revenue and capital budget position for the current year and summarises the relevant parts of the council's balance sheet. And alongside that are several recommendations relating to the committee's responsibilities. So summarising each part of the position in turn. So on the revenue side, at period 10, the council is forecasting an overspend of £6.3 million or 1%, which is slightly improved from the position reported at period 8. In previous updates through the year to committee and again here, we've brought to your attention pressures that this council, along with others nationally, is facing from demand for key services such as children and care placements, home to school transport and mental health services. In these services, increasing demand through the year has outstripped supply, or increasing complexity has outstripped supply, and which has driven up costs. The other key drivers of the forecast overspend remain broadly the same, with pressures on waste disposal, lower than expected income on key income generation work, and higher capital financing costs. These continue to be partly offset through underspends on older people services, which sees lower than expected growth through the year and additional funding that we've received in year. As well as that core revenue position, the position on the ring-fence dedicated schools grant is worth bringing to attention, as the forecast there is worsened to a £23 million in-year deficit, which is driven mainly by high needs spending. That worsening follows detailed forecasting work over recent months and a continued increase in costs faced across mainstream, special and independent schools in the new academic year. So that deficit is ring-fenced under current regulation still, and with the previous deficit would result in a combined just under £64 million deficit at the end of the year. On the capital programme, the council is now forecasting to not fully meet the overall budgeted slippage on schemes, and therefore is forecasting an overspend on the net budget of approximately £16 million. It's important for me to emphasise that this position is due to better delivery against agreed and planned capital schemes than we've seen in recent years. The council makes an overall allowance for slippage across the board on capital schemes that is based on historic trends and lags behind improved delivery, hence the position here. On the balance sheet, the report sets out an updated earmarked reserves projection, and linked to that are two recommendations relating to reserves. So firstly, the committee is asked to agree a transfer from funds previously ring-fenced to the Regional Adoption Agency to fund work within the Children Education and Families Directorate. And secondly, the report asks for a delegation to the Chief Executive to draw down up to £1 million from the change in digital reserve to fund initial costs linked to local government reform. Now, more information on both of those is available in the report, and I will say on the second of those around local government reform that we do expect to need to incur additional spend for additional resource to deliver on the initial phases of that work, and other councils who've been through this, through their experiences, show that the process does cost constituent councils a significant resource to deliver. Thirdly, turning to debt, at 5.3 of Annex A, the key debt indicators for the council are shown, and information is provided around improvement works that is taking place on that. One aspect of the improvement works is reviewing ageing debts that may be judged to be irrecoverable, and following a further review of some of those, the report sets out at 5.3.6 of Annex A, 4 accounts that following review, officers across the council's adult social care and finance teams judged to have no economic chance of recovery, and are hence recommended to the committee for write-off. The report sets out some lessons that have been learned from those cases and steps that will be taken to hopefully avoid them occurring again in new situations. And just to reiterate, the council does rigorously pursue income that it is owed. Finally, Chair, turning to recommendation E, under section 6 of Annex A, the report sets out further information regarding the council's wholly owned housing company, This Land. The committee will be aware that additional support has been provided to the company through this year, and following an agreement of the company's business plan for 25-26 at the recent shareholder subcommittee of the Assets and Procurement Committee, a restructuring of existing loans with no new lending for the council is proposed for the committee's consideration. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave the introduction there.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Chris.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'll have 2 bites of the chair if I may, but I'll leave the second one until later. My first question, I was a little bit surprised to see the proposal to transfer £1 million from the change in digital reserve to pay for the initial, and I emphasise the word initial, stages of the work on local government reorganisation. Now, you and I, Lucy, are maybe the only 2 members in this room who have seen just how much work and time and effort has already gone into that, even at these very early stages. And I appreciate there's an awful lot more to be done, not merely in terms of modelling, but also in terms of the appropriateness of various options which need to be considered in terms of providing efficient and effective local government. So there's an awful lot to be done. But £1 million is a very large amount of additional money to go into this, and it's a suspiciously round sum as well. And I was wondering, what will this £1 million be actually spent on? Will it be spent on getting consultants to do things? Will it be spent on hiring short-term members of staff? Will it be spent on something even more interesting and exciting, computer modelling or whatever? What will the £1 million be spent on over and above the costs which there will be to our own members of staff, which will be met internally?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Bowden for the question. As you rightly note, in terms of the recommendation, it does describe drawdown of up to £1 million from that reserve. It doesn't mean that that would necessarily be accessed. In terms of what the funding would be used for, it's exactly as you have outlined, Councillor Bowden. It would be a mixture of things. So there would be additional short-term staffing that may be required with specialist skills to be employed directly by the council. There would be a requirement, in my view, and having taken advice from other officers, for short-term consultancy or specialist support on areas of activity, such as some of the detailed financial modelling. And equally importantly, for any business case that this council needs to put forward, as is the case with other neighbouring county councils, we would probably want to have some independent assurance of what we're putting forward for members to consider. So not just from your own officers. For example, Suffolk County Council have engaged two different sets of external support to help with the development of their business case, and one to then provide separate assurance on the robustness of the estimates and figures they're putting forward. Mindful that members are due to debate this matter, not this specific one, but local government reorganisation more fully on the 18th of March. What I would want to highlight to this committee, and which is incorporated in the report for council published yesterday, is based on the costs of local government reorganisation that have already taken place in other parts of the country. The minimum cost we probably anticipate this to apply for Cambridgeshire would be at least £18.6 million across the whole system, not just cost borne by the county council. Those costs tend to have been consumed in other areas where local government reorganisation has been undertaken by exactly what I'm proposing here, a combination of additional specialist staffing, probably on short-term contracts, and external consultancy report. I'm very mindful, Chair, that in the ministerial invitation to us, government have been very clear that they expect us to continue to provide all business as usual services and consume the costs of local government reorganisation. Therefore, we're having to look to our own reserves to partly support that, in addition to the extensive use of existing county council staff. I need to be able to make sure we get the balance right so that business as usual services don't suffer as a consequence of having to respond to government's invitation. I hope that explanation is helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Chief Exec. And I fully understand all the comments that you have made, although I have to say that figure of 18.6 million that you mentioned, that you referred to, which of course is just one historical example, but that is an absolutely horrifying number to come up with. And I think, Lucy, it's really quite important that we both keep control on this and that it is reported to members. So I'm not quite sure what mechanism is going to be best in order to do this, but I wonder if some consideration can be given as to how we do both of those things. Both there is the day-to-day control over how much is being spent and what on, and then how it's being reported back to members. Thank you.
Chair, thank you through you, and again thank you to Councillor Bowden for the follow-up question and comments. Subject to decisions of full council next week, based on the paper that was published yesterday, there is a proposal to establish a member working group from full council which would maintain oversight of these issues, and we would obviously ensure that financial reporting not only happened to this proposed working group, but also as part of regular financial reporting to strategy, resources and performance. So I would, in effect, Chair, give a twin track reporting on this, so that we have proper assurance. Thank you.
Richard.
Good morning, everyone. That was a very full answer, so I don't want to comment on it other than to say I think as members we should express our thanks and support to all our staff that have been involved in huge amounts of time assessing and talking about with fellow councils the different options, giving support to you as our leader on this. And that tricky balancing act between doing that properly in the interest of the residents we represent, but keeping the business going is really important. And so we should place on record our thanks to not just to Stephen, but to everyone that he represents in those endeavours. I am aware that we've got the report next week, but this is an opportunity at this committee to dialogue with officers that we won't have at council. So I will just make one more related point, which both Councillor Bowden and myself in the Adults and Health Committee exchanged on and did say that we wanted to raise today. We've already begun to encounter strategies that go on for up to 10 years, contracts that go on for 7 years, and a capital programme that is projected to go on further than the probable life of this council. It's clearly not for one service committee to think how it should deal with that. And I'm not expecting the Chief Executive to give us a full answer this morning at all. But can I just place on record, I think the service committees need very clear guidance, and the CLT needs very clear guidance about how we properly fulfil our obligations in a climate that is obviously unique to, well, it's not quite unique to me actually, but that's a different story, but which is obviously a very new environment that's there. I know, and I'm very pleased that the Chief Executive and others have been taking part in discussions with other councils that have gone through local government reform. So they will be learning about this. But I just want to place on record, the sooner that we as service committees can get some pretty clear guidance about how we deal with those issues or not, that's important, and I don't want to deal with that just in relation to my own committee. I think it affects the whole of the council.
Chair, through you, just a brief comment in response to Councillor Howard. I won't obviously prejudge decisions of full council next week, but I think the paper that has been issued for members' consideration next Tuesday effectively starts the next phase of what needs to happen and sets out, at least in the first instance, proposed governance to help that move forward, following which, yes, I think the points made around service and policy committees having clear guidance beyond this council term and particularly into the new council term from May onwards will be absolutely essential. So comments absolutely agreed with and noted. Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Lucy. I just want to make a generic statement, really. As part of this thing, we're going to move into confidential session, I'm sure, to discuss what's on at 6.6 around this land. I would welcome, I was part of the shareholder subcommittee meeting recently, and I think it's fair to say that anybody involved in that, we had an extremely thorough debate in confidential session. I would just encourage us to be as clever as we can to share as much as we can in public session. I know we can't go into pounds, shillings and pence over here, but maybe some of the principle of things that could be shared. As we know, there's an awful lot of interest in this matter right across the county, particularly in my ward. But, you know, we have three particular main areas of geography of sites that are concerned. So I'm just going to encourage all members around the table and officers in the room that where possible, if we can share what we can share it. With total respect to the fact that there are parts of this where we would not want to break any commercial in confidence and put what is a trading entity into any awkwardness. But I would just encourage people to share if we can.
Thank you. That point is well made. I think if we do need to discuss anything that's in Appendix C in detail, we will definitely need to move into confidential session. But the point that you make, the much broader point that you make about the value of being as open and transparent about the situation of this land and the way in which the council is managing that, I think is absolutely well made and well taken. I'm reasonably certain that we will have questions about that coming to full council as well, and we stick with that principle of being as open as we can about the situation next week as well as today. I don't know whether there are any other, I think we do need, if we want to discuss stuff on Appendix C, we will need to move into private session. And I would rather do that at the end of the meeting rather than now. So if there are questions on that, can we move those to the very end of the meeting so that we can get the rest of the meeting done in public rather than having to move from public session to private session and back again, which is always difficult. But point very well made and taken. Mark.
Completely different subject, but still part of obviously this section. I may have shared this with council before, but my father was an advanced dementia patient in a care home, and he is coming towards the threshold. And I noticed that we've got 4 incidents of that where we're now in the process. So from me being on the other side of that and sitting here as a council member, I have to say I feel exposed as his power of attorney as to what that process is, how it works, and how we transport ourselves through what's legally what we have to do. The care home have been fantastic, and they will, I'm sure, grab us by the hand and lead us through that. But I do think that there's an education part of this as well to those going through the process. And I'd just like to ask those involved from the council, particularly officers, as you know, are we comfortable where our education is on this for those that are going through it, and for people with a responsibility for their parents or whoever it is they're looking after? Because I'm heading into a journey here, and I don't really, well, I guess I do know the destination, but I don't know the twists and turns of the journey ahead. And I'm just thinking that if that education was as good as it possibly could be, could we have reduced 183 grand's worth of debt that we're listed in the thing to have avoided it? So that's my question to the council.
I think it's a really good question. Probably, I'll come to Stephen to answer about that in these specific cases. But on your broader point about are we using all the kind of mechanisms we have as a council to educate people, I'll come back to that in a minute because I think it's a really important point. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. As I said, the report sets out the sort of summary situation in each of the 4 accounts, and they are unusual situations and linked as well. And I suppose just to say there is sort of officer work going on, reports up through to Audit and Accounts Committee around debt improvement work. Some of these are fairly historic cases, and as I said in the introduction, the intention is to learn the lessons and try to avoid the specific case that leads to the write-off happening again in future.
Thank you. Richard, did you want to come in on this point?
I'll be brief because I know it's the second time, but Councillor Goldsack and I spent a whole day together recently at an event, and so we discussed this. I just want to put on record, it's all for chief officers to answer, but I will put on record a view. I think it's true that we had a period where we could have been a lot better on our debt recovery, where we were way behind on doing the assessments. People were waiting too long, and then they were getting very large bills that they were finding really difficult. And we acknowledged that, we didn't hide it, and we've done something about it. And as I said at the budget setting council meeting, we have now driven it down, so there's only 55 people out of 6,000 who are waiting, and they're waiting an incredibly short amount of time. And I think that's been an acknowledgement of the difficulties of dealing with this. I don't think it's wholly a response to the education point. I hear that question, and I think it's a very fair question. But I would want to give the committee some confidence that we've been aware that there was an issue there, and we've really done our best to deal with it to the extent, as you know, Chair, that the team of the year for the council announced last Tuesday was the finance team that supports adults and health, because of the superb job that they've done. And I'll just finish by saying this, and other members of this committee will know I've banged on about the charges review because I've wanted to ensure that we are as sensitive as we absolutely should be to people who are at a critical moment of their lives. And it was a good review. It's not perfect, but it was a good review. It's informed the service, and I think we are in a better place than we were before. And I want to record that at this meeting.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a comment of my own before I come back to, I think I've got Chris and then Steve, but just on this point, I think the point that you make, Mark, about making sure that we are doing everything we can to help inform and educate residents about this process is really, really well made, because it is a complete, I think most people who end up in this position with their parents or other members of the family having to go through the process, it does feel like a nightmare. We're coming on later on the agenda today to talk about our digital strategy. I think we need to think about how we use digital technology and the ability to have video of people telling their stories, because actually it's often much easier to try and help people to understand that process through a story of a case that might be not dissimilar from theirs, rather than just endless forms, which and bureaucracy, which is often I think how that process feels. And you do have to do the forms and the bureaucracy because it is a complex, detailed process. But I think just having some people telling their stories about how it worked for them and what happened probably would be helpful. So maybe that's something we can discuss under that item on the agenda, if that's helpful.
If I can just come back, yeah, thank you very much for the contributions. I think it's interesting. I just to share a further example of it is I've recently, after some research that I've done myself, I've recently transferred a sum of money from my father's bank into a holding bank, and I've put it under the title, and it's entirely under the title funeral costs. And that's not something you want to think about, but that's a reality that I've had to do, right? And the advice that I was given was that is actually a very fair and legitimate thing to do. Now, I didn't put £100,000 in there, but I did put, you know, a decent amount for a good family funeral sort of thing. But actually, people don't know that. And I'm in the fortunate position of being a member of this council, and you know, I can go and research and talk to people and understand that. So I'm not saying I want a full review, and I think I take Councillor Howard's point. You know, the team of the year have done a fantastic job and deserve pats on the back for it. But I just think that we've got residents in care homes. If we've got the right communications with care homes could tell us could inform council where people are at that journey to tick mark, to go into a dialogue with, to say, you're going to be facing this coming up. Can we work with you, and how can we get there? So I just, you know, I think the digital strategy is a good idea. And one last comment on this is that you don't know what you don't know. So in my father's case, and I know this because I was talked around the care home, in my father's case, he was already past the point of being of sound mind before we could make some certain decisions that we maybe should have made when he wasn't of sound mind. You know what I mean? So it's a very difficult case. And of course, then what you get, lastly, I don't want to dominate this, but lastly, what you get is, oh, Fred next door has not paid a penny for his, and he's got all, you know, and it's just a completely different set of circumstances. So yeah, I would encourage us to review it and to do what we can. And any 1% improvement, I think, by anybody going through that journey would be most welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Brief comments, because unfortunately both Councillor Goldsack and I share this experience. I have a similar situation with my mother-in-law right now in a different local authority area, but very much faced with the same type of challenges. The reason I'm saying that is I would agree entirely about his views in respect of what more can we do about providing information, advice and education to people digitally and otherwise. I think this is one of the most challenging areas for us to do and do well, working particularly in a system that is not entirely within our control, so care homes being a good example of that. I do think our forthcoming Care Quality Commission inspection that starts, or the field work starts at the end of this month, is going to be quite helpful, because one of the areas the inspectors will be looking at is how much co-production, technical term from the inspectors really, how much co-production do we do with service users and their families? So in my head, one of the areas we really do need to look at how we can better embrace is how we can work with service users, carers, and particularly their families to help inform, advise and educate on issues around the cost of adult social care and making appropriate provision for the future, because I think Councillor Goldsack's comments around funeral expenditure is also something that, much as none of us like to face up to those things, we do need to talk about as a society. So I concur with the points. I think there might be an opportunity around how we hear from our service users and families more effectively going forward. But I suspect we have a lot more to do in this space on information, advice and education. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Very constructive discussion, I think. I think Chris was next and then Steve.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. This is a slightly technical question, primarily for Mr. Howarth, but others may wish to give an answer. And it's difficult to know if it's good news or bad news. But as Mr. Howarth said, there's a capital overspend being projected of some £16.5 million, of which £2 million, well, £2 million isn't an overspend, it's actually an underspend. And the net £18.5 million overspend is a bit difficult to describe. We all know how difficult it is to project when capital spend will take place in a program, especially a big program. So we always will, quite correctly, put in a provision in our budget for capital program slippage. And my understanding is that on place and sustainability, we have £18.5 million that we now believe will be spent, which is less than the total amount that we had provided for slippage by the end of the year. Now, £18.5 million on a net budget of 70 million for the Directorate for capital expenditure is over 26%. So we are saying that more than 26% of the net budget has been erroneously, for want of a better word, provided for on the assumption that there would be more slippage than there actually was. That's an awfully large amount. And I wonder if some explanation can be given about why the number is so very large, and if there are any lessons which can or should be learned from that for next year's potential capital variations that we may have, and for future budget setting exercises, those few budget setting exercises we still have to do. Now, it may well be this £18.5 million is an absolute one-off to do with one particular thing, or it may be something more systemic and more detailed. And I just don't have a feel for what it is, and I wonder if we could be given more information, please. It is a very large number.
I'll come to Stephen first, and then if anyone else wants to come in.
So, Chair, to answer Councillor Bowden's sort of technical side of the question specifically first, so he's right to say that we provide for a slippage budget within the Place and Sustainability Directorate of around £30 million this year. They are forecasting to have slippage or an underspend of £12 million against that, which leaves a variance and an overspend, if you like, of £18.5 million against it. That is the case. The slippage budget built in for Place and Sustainability is the largest of the directorates this year, based, as I said in the introduction, based on historic trends. Delivery against the sort of the gross scheme by scheme capital budget within Place and Sustainability was not as good as it should be for some time. So based on those trends, quite a large slippage budget was built in. As Councillor Bowden also said, you never know which capital scheme the slippage is going to be against either. Ultimately, this is probably a good news story in respect of the delivery of capital schemes. If the capital slippage budget had been closer percentage-wise to other directorates, this would have been a much less of an overspend position. In terms of lessons learned about this, this is the first month I think that this has been here with a forecast overspend, but I've definitely alluded to that this was a risk of happening for at least the last one or two of these reports. So, for the business plan for next year, the slippage budget for Place and Sustainability has been reduced to be much more in line with the other council directorates. And when we do an annual rebaselining and reforecasting exercise for the capital programme at the start of the financial year, we will look at the slippage budgets there as well for P&S and for the other council directorates to make sure they're appropriate as well. But as I said, this is spending against agreed scheme budgets that has taken place just at a not meeting the full level of slippage that is built in after those scheme budgets are set.
Thank you, Stephen. Do either of the other senior leaders want to comment on it before I do? Michael?
Yeah, thank you, through you, Chair. I think just to echo that point in terms of the prudence that's been applied coming into the year that is just finishing now, 24-25, based on several years worth of legacy. And what we're seeing here is that catch up in terms of the improvement of deliverability of contract management. So it is a positive position to be in. Lessons are learnt going forward. And I think, this is something that we'll be keen to ensure the organisation understands, because, in the past, what this has meant is that potentially that's given a little bit of a windfall potential for our borrowing position. As we strengthen both our slippage and our capital forecasting, that leaves very little room for that, and the organisation needs to realise and understand that in terms of the position at year end. But I would absolutely echo everything Stephen said then in terms of the lessons learnt for next year, but we'll continue to monitor this, and the service needs to continue, particularly in Place and Sustainability, to achieve that good level of performance, some of which could be outside of its control, such as weather. And clearly there could always be slippage, which is why we budget for that. But I think as we prudently applied for previous year's performance, we will now improve that performance in terms of the financial forecasts.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll give you the third of the three musketeers, if I may, then, committee. So this is a good news story. I will start with that very clearly. When I rejoined the County Council in 2022, it would be fair to say that delivery of the capital programme and the proportion of capital programme delivery on time, on budget, was not where it needed to be from a performance term. We have seen a significant improvement in what I would best describe to committee as grip and control, especially by the Place and Sustainability Directorate, which means they are now much more on target with delivery of the capital programme that we approve for them. As Michael and Stephen have both said, however, that does mean we need to adjust our future approach to business and budget planning in terms of capital variation, budgeting and making assumptions around underspends on capital. I actually think that based on the year we have seen, and whilst this creates a pressure at year end, as the report rightly articulates, we should be taking less optimistic assumptions from a financial perspective of capital underspend, and probably a more optimistic assumption of capital delivery, as we would expect going forwards. But historical performance of this authority had not borne that out, so the finance assumptions until this year were probably based on very prudent previous performance, or dare I say previous underperformance by some parts of the council. So I'm pleased with the performance improvement. Of course, that comes at the downside of pressure on the finances, but I would in some ways rather have the capital scheme delivered on time and on budget. Thank you.
Chris, I'll let you come back, but then I'm also going to add something.
Thank you, Lucy. As I said, it's difficult to know whether to call this good news or bad news. Overall, I'd say it's good news because we are actually managing to deliver on the programmes which we've set out to deliver. In the sense that it's bad news from a budgetary and financial planning point of view rather than from a delivery point of view. And I think that I still haven't fully gathered whether this is just a good improvement across the board in terms of delivery in the Directorate, or if there are one-off occurrences which have taken place here which are unlikely to be replicated. The implication, well, a comment which Mr. Howarth made, which I thought was interesting, was that this was caused by us not meeting the agreed level of slippage. Well, it's slightly the other way around, I think. It's that the level of slippage that we anticipated, that we budgeted for, was greater than the amount which we actually ended up with. It's not as though the level of slippage is a target which is meant to be achieved by each individual directorate. But the implications of this, both in the current financial year and in future financial years, is not insignificant when you talk about a figure of 18.5 million or 26 and a bit % of the net capital spend of the Directorate. You've got, I'm sure there is an implication in this, and there is some effect which is shown in these figures on the capital financing side, on the revenue side in the current financial year. And I also wondered the extent to which, and this depends upon which programmes there are and whether they have been completed or whether they're ongoing, whether this will affect our capital finance requirement and potentially even our minimum revenue provision for 26/7. And I just don't know that. And it's not necessary for me to know that detail. What is important is that it's recognised that this level of variation from an estimate to reality is not helpful to us in budgetary terms, and everything which can be done to learn from this is important without swinging the pendulum so far the other way that we end up with an even worse position of underestimating the slippage. And as was said by the Section 151 officer, it's extremely difficult to predict things. They can be as much out of our control as weather-related or a whole host of other things. So it's not a science. It is an art in trying to get this right. We just need to make sure that our art is better in future.
Thank you. I think there would be probably universal agreement that we need to try and make sure that we're hitting closer to the target in future. My understanding is that we had several years of underestimating the slippage. We've now got a year of overestimating it. In terms of getting closer to the target, that is sort of what you would expect to happen, but I would completely agree that the overestimate is considerably larger than I think any of us would have expected. And that is good news, but we do need to learn from it. The other one point that I wanted to make on your initial introduction on this topic, and I think it's been a good thing for us to have discussed, was a small comment about we need to learn from this for our future budget processes, even though we may not have very many more budget processes to go through. I think it's incredibly important for all of us that we are really clear that we need to learn from it for our future budget processes and for the budget processes of whichever council or councils take over from us, because there will be people who will be carrying on doing capital budgets, and we need to make sure that those continue to be well managed and that we have more accurate assumptions around what our slippage is likely to be than we have had this year. So I hope that's an adequate response to your thing, Chris. And you may come back and then we'll move to Steve.
Really briefly, Lucy, because I don't want to move from this subject to another one, but my estimation, and I had a conversation with the chief exec shortly before this meeting started, my estimation is that we will lose a significant amount, by which I mean the local area will lose a significant amount of corporate memory, and we are likely to have greater failures in estimation immediately following the reorganisation rather than lesser.
But the more learning we can do now, the better. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three separate areas. The first one's on this one. So if you've indulged me, I'll just confirm, because it's quite complicated, a simple question, and then move back to my comments on that, then I'll go on to the others. So just to confirm, Stephen, that the Place and Economy budget is £12 million underspent from the actual overall budget, ignoring the slippage.
The forecast is that it will be underspent by that on the gross budget. Yes, the net budget, however, will be a forecast overspend.
Thank you. And the reason I wanted to draw attention to that, Chair, is I think we're giving out, to a certain degree, the wrong message today. All right. A lot of this has been described as good news in terms of capital delivery or bad news in terms of finance. And I would describe it as an improvement journey. I think we heard from Stephen Moyer in 2022, post-COVID, with the supply chain issues. Historically, there was an element of capital slippage. In fact, when I started in the county council, there was no slippage budget. It was first mooted by the leader of the Liberal Democrats. I'm struggling to remember his name. We thought it was a good idea, and we introduced it as the Conservative administration, and we set the not a target, but we set a budget of £1 million per year, because which was the actual revenue implications, rather than having it individually set by the directorates, etc. It was on the overall programme, which was, of course, with the school buildings, much bigger than it is now. But since then, you've nuanced it and looked at past history of certain areas and performance, etc. So the reason I don't want to call it good news is because at the end of the day, it's £12 million of capital expenditure that was approved that wasn't delivered on time. And if you take any one of those projects that are in that £12 million underspend, the people who put them forward included all of the elements of slippage that they expected in the programme. If somebody says something will take 2 years to build, they naturally incorporate things for bad weather. They incorporate things for supply. There are overlaps in the programme. So they've already said there is natural timetable where we will still deliver on time despite some of the events that might happen. So when you still deliver outside of that timetable, somebody is failing in their prediction or their delivery. And that's, I wouldn't say it's normal for a capital project. It's normal to incorporate the timescales, including them, and certainly we want them all to arrive on time. I look forward to the day when we can get rid of the slippage budget and we can actually deliver everything we plan on time, which will make everybody's life easier. I know that's a thing that we wish for and aspire to, and I'm sure you do as well. But I think that's the message we need to get across, that this is a journey of improvement. There are improvements, but there is still quite a long way to go. Now, there will be an impact on the revenue budget, and whilst it may not be welcome in the short term, actually getting better at prediction, modelling and delivery is the ultimate aim, not in making it easier to handle finances, which is where this whole thing started, trying to manage with the significant pressures in the past by looking at every penny that wasn't spent in any particular year. So that's the commentary I'd like to leave on that one. On two other areas I just wanted to tackle. The one area which has been remarked upon already is the £183,000 being written off for customer accounts. Now, this isn't the first time that this has happened, and the last time it was here and the time before, we keep hearing about the improvement journey, how we're tightening up, etc. And I don't want to get. I think there's a line between strategic and operational, and what we got in front of us is a strategic paper again today with a very short note about why we've got to write £183,000 worth of taxpayers' money off again. And the operational side is saying to us, yes, but we're getting better. And I've come to the point where I've got to ask for more than that. I've got to say, you know, okay, but next time you come here, and I'm sure there will be a next time, I would like, even if it's in a confidential note, I'd like to know how long these debts were known about that they were unlikely to be paid, when they were first discovered, what actions were taken, so we can start looking through the strategic lens as whether the operational side is actually on that improvement journey that will stop or start limiting these rather than having them coming forwards in front of us. I know that there's 15 million written into the budget over the MTFS for debt write-off, and I understand a large amount of that might be to do with the partnership with the NHS rather than elsewhere. But at the end of the day, every time we write off money, it's taxpayers' money. So were the sums wrong in the first place, in which case we may have some historic ones that will never be corrected because they're historic and the sums were wrong in the first place, so need to be recognised early. Or are we just getting better? So I'd like a lot more detail in future in the confidential if we have any more of these come forward, so I can examine it in a bit closer detail. The third one is a question, and it's on the overspend. So it was £10 million at the high point of the year, 7 point something, 6 point something now, and in 3.2.5, I think it is, that says that this remaining £6 million overspend may have implications for budget setting next year. Budget setting for next financial year is done, so it's the budget setting in the next financial year for the year after, I take it we'll be talking about. Now, I recall for the budget setting for this year, and without looking at the exact figures, there was an element of the overspend that was running at £7 million at that point in time, that it was expected that this county council would meet, i.e. the level of overspend would come down. I think it might have been about £3 million. So I'd like to just ask the officers, do we still have the confidence that this element of 6 something will get down to 3? And also, so that the committee are aware that if it does come in at 6, it's not £6 million you're looking at in the budget setting next year. It'll be the difference between 6 and what you had left over. Thank you.
Stephen, do you want to go first, or Michael? Michael, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the first point, it's probably worthwhile also noting that the debt position relating to adults has been in some detail to both the Audit Committee and the Adults and Health Committee, but certainly we continue to improve our debt reporting so we can look at what further we can report to this committee as well through that. So just wanted to make that point. Council accounts is correct. £3.2 million was the figure noted in the Section 25 statement. This clearly is above that position as it stands at the moment. So that will require additional savings to be identified in 25-26 if that is to be the year-end position. There is a lot of water still to flow within and under the bridge between now and the year end, and therefore there can be some decisions that will be taken around or just after year end in terms of things such as carry forward capitalisation, and we will look at all of that. But any remaining balance would be both sought within 25-26, and if that weren't recurring, would need to be found then in 26-27 as well, although it would be hoped that as we work through that model, the first is to manage the further spending this year, and then obviously the savings on a recurrent basis in 25-26.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any further hands. I think it's been a really useful and constructive debate, but I haven't heard anybody speak against any of the recommendations. So unless I see any objection now, can we take those recommendations as carried? Thank you. I've got nods, so we will take those as carried and move on to item 5 on the agenda, I think, which is the Digital Future Report, which is being presented by Tim Spears. Welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Good morning. Council agreed a motion regarding the impact of new technologies last year.
Tim, could you put the microphone very close to your mouth and speak up slightly? They're quite directional, so you need to speak straight.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Have you heard anything so far? Shall I start again? Thank you. I'll start again. Council agreed a motion regarding impact of new technologies last year, and I'm now coming back to present an update for information. I'll accept that or work on the basis that committees read the paper, so I'm just going to run through some key points, and then I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have. Also, for your information, I've also spoken to Councillor Beckett, who I know the committee appointed as the member champion for digital. So in terms of key points, what I'd like to say is that customer and digital services being together presents a real opportunity for us moving forward. There's lots of synergy there and lots of opportunity for digital. And I really want to draw your attention as well to how technology will support development of our future council, including adapting to LGR. You'll see in the report that our immediate priorities are building the foundations for change, for stability, making sure that we're able to lead with digital by design, that digital enabling the change, and that the key here is about supporting services across the council, but of course also residents and communities, to make sure that digital is delivering all of the change that we need. Those are my key points, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the report and for working closely with Councillor Beckett on it. I think it was his motion that led to this coming forward to us. Questions from members? Chris, and then Philippa.
Thank you very much, Chair. I beg your pardon. Without wishing to preempt any decisions which will be made in the next week or two within this council, I read this with some interest, and of course we are now coming towards the end of a process of decoupling from Peterborough City Council as far as digital is concerned. And digital, of course, as we see from this report, is a very wide-ranging subject. It's certainly not narrow, and it infiltrates virtually everything which is done within this council. My concern, which I don't believe is really highlighted effectively in this report, and I will come back to this in the next agenda item, but my concern is that we are failing at this time to have a strategy in place to anticipate the problems which will occur in 2028 when we need to consider how we separate out the work which is being done here for Cambridgeshire County Council as a whole, and at least in part integrate that with one or more other authorities, particularly in terms of upper tier responsibilities, Peterborough City Council. So whilst I appreciate we've just completed the decoupling from Peterborough City Council, I would have thought that from a strategic point of view, we need not necessarily to be in lockstep with Peterborough City Council from now on, given the high likelihood that some part of the work of this council or some area of the work of this council is going to have to integrate with Peterborough City Council. So whilst I'm not suggesting we act in lockstep, but at least we don't act in a divergent manner where it will make it difficult for those areas which do end up being in the same unitary authority as Peterborough. We don't end up with a situation where we create problems which we otherwise could avoid by taking appropriate actions in the 3 years before that change takes place. Now, it's made more difficult, of course, by the fact that we don't know what the boundaries are going to be. There's a lot of uncertainty. But if the government's instructions are to be followed, and if we're to believe that those instructions will be followed by the government themselves, then it's extremely likely that we will end up with at least a part of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, at least a part of Cambridgeshire County Council area being incorporated within a unitary authority, which will also incorporate Peterborough. So I'm a little bit disappointed that there isn't more said about the preparations for that and the need for more liaison with Peterborough City Council without in any way suggesting that we act in lockstep with them. Additionally, we can't just sit back and think local government reorganisation's coming in 3 years' time, so let's just forget about this and wait until that. That's not a viable option for us, and I'm not suggesting that for a second. I just have my fear here that we will find ourselves creating problems unnecessarily that we could avoid if we were to anticipate them effectively. And of course, the closer we get to the 31st of March 2028, the more significant this will be. We are some distance away from that. We don't know the details of what's going to happen, but I would have hoped that there would be greater emphasis placed in this report on that particular challenge and the awareness of our needing to help to resolve it, and also to get Peterborough City Council to do so as well. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. Tim, do you want to take that one and then, oh, Michael, sorry, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Bowden was going along my response line in his latter part of his comments there. I think, as Tim said, and Tim, I think this was your maiden speech or introduction of a report to committee, so well done. In terms of the direction following from the motion, this was the main purpose of this, and clearly the motion was several months ago, well before local government reorganisation was announced. What I would say is that our decoupling from Peterborough in terms of staff went very well. We've maintained very good relationships with Peterborough. We haven't yet decoupled the Microsoft tenancy whilst we explore what the next phase is. And of course, and it's already been alluded to by our Chief Executive and I think the Chair, that there will be a debate coming up. None of us are yet certain as to what that position will be, re-council or councils. And clearly, as that begins to emerge, we will absolutely need to focus in, and it becomes one of ability to prioritise the ability of both the workforce in terms of our capacity, but also the scope and the ability to change. So our future council programmes around improvements in both the customer engagement and data, digital and technology remain an absolute focus. We have a very good, and through this motion, working relationship across Cambridgeshire, so that we are actively engaged in our relationship with our peer, including fire and police authorities, in terms of moving forward with digital change. And I think that's a strong platform on which to recognise, including with Connecting Cambridgeshire, where we build for the future, whatever that looks like. So absolutely, as the second recommendation points out, to note to bring back further updates on this, including an update on our digital strategies to this committee in the summer is where we will need to go. And that continued reflection will be something that, as we get clarity, will move forward, but we're not taking our foot off the gas in terms of changing the way that we use the advantageous and opportunistic position of digital to improve the services to our communities.
Thank you. I'll let you come back, but briefly, Chris, because I have actually got quite a long list of people.
Fully accept that it's a matter which will have to be a change over the course of the next few months. It's not something which is going to change or should change tomorrow. I merely wanted there to be greater awareness of this. Additionally, of course, it's not merely the fact that we will need upper tier responsibilities to be coordinated in some parts with what's currently taking place in Peterborough. We also will need to ensure that our systems as a whole will integrate as easily as possible with our 5 district councils as well, so that whichever new unitary authorities are created have as smooth a takeover as they possibly can. And whilst, as I say, we've got 3 years for this, that 3 years will go by remarkably quickly, and decisions which we make potentially even this year will quite conceivably have an effect on how easy that process is going to be in 2028. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I've got Philippa, Alan, Richard and Elisa. So just to let you know that it's quite a long list. Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. Some comments and a couple of questions, particularly about the digital forum. I'm here as a substitute, you understand, and reading this, it's a really good paper, and I really felt it brought a lot of things very clearly in. As I was reading it, I did start coming out in a rash a bit when the word leverage comes in. And then I realized that it is being used more as a technical term than the sort of thing that comes to the layperson's mind, like opening a paint tin and possibly destroying it and unable to shut it again. So I'm married to a maths teacher, and he explained that leverage is all to do with bringing strength in from different places. And if that is how this is being used, then excellent. Maybe we need to make that clear. It is the sort of thing that can put some people off reading any further, because it's one of those words that comes up, and maybe I'm the only one who wasn't thinking about it in the right way. But if it is being used in that technical, and you're nodding, thank you. So in 5.7, fine. And looking at 5.7 and 5.8, I was unsettled in that first sentence, using data-driven decision-making to inform policy decisions, because I'm wondering if that's where the AI making judgments is the danger area. But I know that a great deal is being discussed about that. And I may well have misunderstood it. I should probably have to get Councillor Beckett to explain it. But I am a bit concerned that there shouldn't be any policy decisions made almost automatically on the basis of data-driven ones. Lovely to see genomics in there. I'd rather we were not just using the word cutting edge, though, because the genomics, the whole genome sequencing contribution to all manner of healthcare delivery is going to be massive in the future, but possibly we wait for it to be a little bit less than the cutting edge. But as I say, that is really good to see it coming in even now, and we can benefit locally. The digital forum, it's how we take this forward that concerns me. So in 5.3, you introduced the digital forum, and it may be other members of this committee are familiar with this. But if I then go forward to 7.4, where we are talking about the implications for equality and diversity, and this is my real question, Chair, and that is that I am very concerned that digital exclusion should be seen in the light of learning disability, as well as other more financial restrictions and barriers, because it isn't something necessarily you grow out of. And it is something that's best recognised. In fact, that's where genomics comes in a lot when it comes to learning disabilities. So I am concerned that we have built in an awareness amongst our officers of where the steps are in physical language that stop you going along that surface and getting to that service. It needs to be really built in. So the digital forum, presumably that will be making full use of people with life experience and people who have been digitally excluded, and who may by definition be excluded from a digital forum, because we know that email is in many ways the very best way of getting in touch with people and for them to getting in touch with us. But could I have some reassurances then on the 7.4 particularly?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions and comments. Do you want me to answer each point, Chair?
Feel free to answer as many as you would like.
Okay.
I think the key question was the one at the end, but if you've got other comments you want to make about that other bit,
Which was about
feel free.
The
Yes.
forum was the digital inclusion.
I think the digital inclusion.
I'll just make a couple of comments about your earlier questions, if I may. In terms of leveraging, absolutely right. In my mind, maximising perhaps would be a better word, but I'll think about that for future reports. But yeah, it is about maximising, getting the most from rather than anything else. In terms of AI and the, I think it was a data-driven decision making. This is not in AI in a sort of taking over sense. It's more about how we augment AI, how the council and council functions, council services augment the use of AI. So it's not taking over. Just to reassure you on that one. Genomics, yeah, I agree with you in terms of something we need to keep track with. And, in terms of the customer and digital services, we, of course, follow the lead from the services that we enable and underpin. So really, it's there to say that we have that awareness, but we'll be making sure that we work with the services that really have that expertise in that area. In terms of the digital inclusion, again, just something that we are very mindful of. I'm very mindful of. It's very important, as you say, not everyone can engage digitally for many, many reasons, and it's a very complex area. It's not just because, it may not just be because they are financially not able. There are lots of other things which I'm sure committee members will be aware of. In terms of the forum, it is just that it is bringing together, I think I mentioned in the report about, universities, other councils and others. It's about bringing people together so that we can have a conversation across Cambridgeshire about digital, about everything that's in here and probably more as well. I mean, it is one of the councillors mentioned earlier. It's a huge topic and it really is. But the strategies that we will bring back to the committee will set out more direction about how we do these things. So this isn't a one time only. We'll come back with updates, Chair, won't we, in terms of how we progress. Does that cover your questions?
I would like to think so.
Absolutely, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. Alan is next.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for the paper. Broadly, welcome the better connectivity and what we all want. But I'm going to touch on practicalities, if I can, around infrastructure. In that one of my villages has been, over the last probably 18 months, have had two different broadband companies digging up roads or digging up pavements and leaving an absolute mess, really. The Streetworks team have been brilliant, been liaising with them. And I know it's not unique because I was chatting to Councillor MacDonald a couple of months ago, and I know his villages had had similar experiences. What it's doing is obviously, it's not, from a commercial point of view, it's not selling those companies to the community because the community are absolutely fed up with them. And I believe it's going to come to other villages in my division. I know it's a national contract and it's a utility situation and game, which obviously we all understand the situations with that, but really just trying to see what we can do what influence we can bear to stop this, because as I say, certainly one particular village I know of has had massive issues with the contractors who've been not helpful at all, but I'm sure that's not unique around the division, around the county. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure that Tim will be able to say very much about this other than express sympathy, which I think we all will. I think it is a national problem, but Tim, is there anything you can say?
Well, no, I do hear of some personal experience from other places as well around this, but I would say Connecting Cambridge would be the place probably for us to have those conversations.
Stephen, do you want to add anything else?
Just very briefly, Chair, I think Councillor Sharp raises a really important point that actually straddles two service and policy committees. So the Connecting Cambridgeshire programme obviously sits within the Environment and Green Investment Committee's purview, and it's important that we look at the digital connectivity strategy for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough through that committee. But actually the issue of, dare I say, digging up our highways by broadband providers and others is definitely a matter for the Highways and Transport Committee. Obviously, Councillor Sharp is very familiar with that. I do think, however, we need to ensure there's a really strong alignment between the Connecting Cambridgeshire programme and our highways team, particularly Streetworks, so that where utilities are coming along and digging up our highways, not only are they doing them on time and with minimum disruption, but they're actually repairing effectively once they've finished. Clearly, the other side of that is ensuring that we try to get them to follow our dig once policy, which I think members may be aware the County Council is a shortlisted national finalist for, which relates to this very area. However, much more in the way of improvements to make in that space, I would suggest. And yes, I think generally Streetworks and harder sanctions for utility providers that dig up our highways and don't deal with it in a timely fashion and cause ongoing disruption and damage is where we need to be going. Clearly, we make some income from that already. I think there are opportunities to do more and make sure that the utility companies are working better with us in a joined up manner. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a frustration that many of us are very aware of. Richard.
Yes, I very much welcome this report. The recommendations you can hardly disagree with because they're all process recommendations about forums and working parties and strategies. So I know we have to deal with that to then get to an outcome, but there's not much about outcomes in this report. And what I would ask officers to do is to be as ambitious in what we write down and agree as a council as I know you are in the private conversations and briefings that you give. Michael, I've been very impressed by your commitment in this area, and we just want to encourage you, I think, to go further and faster. In truth, you can't tell anything from this report about where we are as a council benchmarked against others in this area, and we should be aiming to be ahead of the curve. I strongly would support that. And so next time we have a report, can we have examples? Like we know in my area, we know that tech-enabled care, we've won an award for, and it's really interesting. We know from listening to other debates in the council that our street maintenance programme is informed by satellite photography. Let's actually get into some of the examples here and try and show that we're at the cutting edge and look and see what's the next bit of the frontier that we're looking at. Of course, one can't disagree with Councillor Bowden on what he says about local government reform and sharing of approaches. But as I said to him last week and repeat today, there's an obligation on this council to work with all the councils within Cambridgeshire and not to predict the outcome of any reform. And that I can understand if one represents Fenland, that one is particularly looking in the direction of Peterborough, but I wouldn't place that above any of the other councils with whom we work. And indeed, on data sharing, to enable these approaches, I'm really excited, notwithstanding a later debate we're going to have about learning disabilities, but I'm really excited about the discussions going on between us and the health service locally on data sharing and being able to predict where need is going to come and to target that need much more effectively in terms of social care and healthcare provision. And indeed, it's something that makes me feel very optimistic still about the partnerships that we have, that those discussions are going on. And I hope that every effort is being made, I think it is from our officers, in order to pursue this. Sorry to bore you, but I say it every time and I'm going to say it again. All of this is only good as the safety net for people who can't use digital approach. Councillor Slatter is extremely correct on this, giving just one example, but I think we need to see it in every report and every strategy. I don't want to hold it back over Luddite concerns, I promise, but it's only as good as the safety net that we provide, and it needs to be written down every time, and written down because it exists every time. Finally, I think there's a conundrum for us as a council in that this is a very expert area in truth. And do we have the resources and the expertise within our curtilage to really be at the cutting edge of AI development, for example? Probably not. If we try and buy it in, it's probably very, very expensive and we can't afford it. So I think there are some difficult choices to be made about how we really maximise our work in this area in a way that we can afford and which reflects the skills and expertise. I'm sure that we're recruiting people. This is a big issue when we recruit people. I'm sure that we're training people like mad and giving them the opportunity for training and work experience to really understand this field better. But I think a lot of our ability to deliver this strategy is us creating a sufficient resource within the council to be able to deliver it. And I have some concerns about that I would have in any council, not particularly about Cambridgeshire. And I'm sure officers are thinking hard about that and trying to maximise the work that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was one key request in that, Tim. I will let you come back, but I think the key request was for examples in future papers, which I think is a really good thought. So anyway, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments and good points that I think you've made, Councillor. I think examples, absolutely, and we'll bring back, as it says in the report, updates will come back to this committee, I believe. So I take your point about examples. We'll make sure that we include them moving forward, because you sort of touched on a couple yourself there, didn't you, that obviously the council is doing very well at, and there are a number of areas where the council is doing well, actually. So we do need to highlight one of the things that we're working on is better visibility of what we're doing in the council around digital and technology, because there is some exciting things. In terms of resources, you're absolutely right. Of course, we're a council. So I suppose if it was anything other than you described, then perhaps that would be another concern. But what I would say is that I won't say leverage, but maximize partnerships that we have. So we do make investment with existing technology organizations, partners. So how do we maximize that to get more value from them? I think is one of the approaches. We're also shaping customer and digital services. So what sort of skills do we need? So for example, we're nearly 100% in the cloud now. We will later in the summer be 100% in the cloud. So there's an opportunity to reshape our workforce around digital. And what you've outlined there, Councillor, I think is one of the things that we will be doing is looking at how we modernize the workforce, not just in digital though. It is about democratization of technology. This is not about sort of walled garden anymore of an IT service. It's more about business technologists. How do we work together, the service areas, the directorates with the customer and digital service, so that we make sure that, one, we're doing the right priorities, like we said before, in terms of our future council, but also that we are working together on it. And actually, when I was talking to Councillor Beckett, he said when he made the motion last year, one of the things that he didn't think perhaps had been appreciated was that this is actually about, from him, was about how service areas directorates really own the digital. So it can't be done to them. So I think it is a partnership. But going back to your point, it is a good point, well made, but we are working on it. And as I say, those things I've outlined, I think, will mean that we can get where we need to be for the council.
Thank you. Really helpful. Elisa.
Thank you very much. Hi, Tim. Very, very welcome. Thank you so much for the work that you presented us today, which is very good. Thank you for the work you've done so far. I'm glad Richard started with the thing I was going to start with, which is, we are sometimes frustrated by how we need to get, a paper that tells us there will be a strategy, and it's very, very preliminary step. So it is sometimes annoying for us because we want to look for outcomes straight away. But this is how local government works, and we have to go through the steps. So in that case, I'm not worried. Richard did say he didn't want to disagree with Councillor Bowden, but I'm going to have a go. Right. I was worried that this would be brought up, and it's not because we don't have to do an enormous amount of work worrying about what we will do with our RT systems and local government reorganisation. But I don't want that to be the subject of every paper that we bring forward on every subject from now until whenever something happens next. There will have to be, and I really hope there is, a very discrete and separate piece of work about how that will work. And it doesn't need to wait until we know the boundaries, although obviously by the time you know the boundaries, it will need to start in earnest. But this is not about that. And it is our duty, even if, we only have 3 years of however long we should have it, if the whole thing takes as long as the government says it should. We are obliged to bequeath something to our successors that explains how we are starting to engage with the modern world as it is. And this is not just some of the things that have been around for a while and we haven't explicitly engaged with any of it, and we should. And that's part of what Alex Beckett has done so far in his role supposed to do. But it's also, when somebody comes here and sits in these seats, and you're sitting in your seat because your job is still going to be necessary, and you will have different people around you. They will want to know, where are we starting from? And the answer can be nowhere. We didn't look at it yet. So we do have to do that, and we do have to do that absolutely irrespective of whether or not this is going to be exactly the same council in 3 years' time. So I would hope that when we get to a strategy, that it will be sufficiently flexible and relevant that anybody who inherits it is going to be able to use it, but also that we keep the implications and the need for the kind of work that we're going to have to sit. You'll have to sit with your counterpart on Cambridge City, with your counterpart in South Cambs, in Fenland, in whatever. You're going to have to sit with all of them and do some very pedestrian work in order to make sure that we compare machines or whatever. But let's not make this strategy about that, because we do need to worry about how we shield ourselves from attacks from, evil people out there, how we make sure that we don't get fooled by nasty AI, and how we harness good AI in order to do the good things that might save us money. That's all the things that we need to make sure this paper is about. So let's keep the LGR to one side. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was not really a question for Tim, so we'll move on to Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not into questions, more about the general nature. Okay. Thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you for working with Alex to bring this forward. It's a good paper in as far as it goes, and I really appreciate the fact we've got an action plan, which is quite comprehensive, and I appreciate the recommendation being that something else will come back. I'm going to be the disheartened one in the room, as usual. It's good in as far as it goes, but it doesn't go to where I want it to go. I have to be very clear on this. This paper for me is about improving a lot of the services that the council delivers through the lens of what exists. All right. So, for example, voice recognition is mentioned. That's out there. Everybody's doing that. And it's about time we did things like that. Although there are caveats to when you introduce voice recognition, you've got to get it right. If not, the resident, it gets extremely frustrated. You see throughout the paper the words realistic and achievable. But I think when Councillor Beckett stood up in full council and talked about AI and the advances in science, advances and what is possible out there, we weren't necessarily thinking about what's achievable and realistic today. It's about what we should be aiming for tomorrow in our journey there. There are sections of this paper that says you've got to get the data right to feed in the front end, and I can't disagree with that. But if you haven't described what you want to use it for at the back end and how AI can help in that, then perhaps you might be not going in the right direction. And you talk about things like infrastructure, having people able to access digital. And I totally agree with that, but that is all business as normal for me, connecting Cambridgeshire, business as normal. And what I wanted to see was something that came back, said how we can change our services or change our back office functions in a way, utilising what is out there already or looking to the future so that we could improve the customer journey. If I take an example, potholes is a favourite one of everybody. The future of a pothole repair would, in my opinion, the local highways officer turns up with an iPad fitted with a camera. They take a photo. That photo generates a size, an order to the people that were commissioned. They receive it. They go out and deal with the repair. They send a photo back. The resident who first reported it gets a response, a well-worded response about what's happening, the dates, etc. When they filled it, the photo of the finished repair goes back. There's geolocation added on right from the start, so you make sure you got the right repair. And then there's a bill raised, etc., etc. So there's hardly any human interaction at all, and the journey is made smoother and more accurate because you've removed a lot of that. Now, a lot of that is process driven, and I know Sue Grace, you did a lot of process driven stuff, improving the journey through improving process, and not much of that is AI. But then the AI kicks in afterwards and says, you know what, you sent the same team to that location 7 times. Or the AI kicks in and says, this one team keeps getting sent out to re-repair their repairs, whereas the other teams get it right first time. All those things are AI, and none of that potential is here in the papers. None of that potential is here. I'm really in agreement with Councillor Howard, and that is something that doesn't very often happen. I'm not even going to have a dig and make that the lead into a, but because I'm really in agreement with him, I don't think this organisation potentially holds the people we need to have this conversation. And I also agree it may be expensive to go and get some of that, but it's going to be really expensive if we don't. If we don't, and we miss the boat and the opportunities that this could bring. So and the paper concentrates very much through the eyes of the customer digital service, not through adults or environment and place and children's. And I'd love us to get some, perhaps some external capacity in and have some blue sky thinking with the people who are responsible for delivering services, with somebody who's really good at AI and robotics and all those modern technologies, and saying, actually, have you thought about if AI was here, you could do this way or this that way? I've seen, for example, we have a lot of strategies. We have lots and lots of strategies. I'd love to put one of those strategies in and say, can you reduce this from 450 page to 100 page and still encompass everything? I'd like some of the reports to be saying, can you rewrite that for a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or a professor, depending on the audience? All of that is possible with AI. All of that will make lives easier for everybody and a better outcome if it's well monitored. And all of those concepts I don't find in here. Now, it's coming back at a later date, and I'd like to hear more about the blue sky thinking at the end and things we can aspire to on top of what we've got in front of us today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think Michael wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My corporate leadership team will know my love of Copilot for redrafting some of my reports. So absolutely echo that use of AI to make me sound clever. I totally accept and agree with everything Councillor Counts has said there, as well as Councillor Howitt and a number of others. It's that future direction balanced against the feasibility, not only of capacity of people, but capacity of resources to put an awful lot in terms of prevention. So you take the example there in terms of actually the topography measuring tools that can now be fitted to things like refuse vehicles, which go right the way across the county. On a weekly basis brings yet further advantage and technology to this stream. So I think the direction that we're hearing today from members is positive, and it is to take that digital strategy to its next level. And echoing the comments made by Deputy Chair just before, in terms of, being able to do all of that at a point in time where we've also got local government reorganisation will be difficult. But I think that focus remains on the improvement to communities. And I think that's what we've heard today, and I absolutely support that. And I think bringing that forward in a prioritised way that enables business plans that both deliver in terms of value for money, in terms of money efficiency, but also in terms of outcomes. And I heard Councillor Howitt's comment very clearly in terms of the word outcomes there. So I think we welcome the comments that we've heard today, and we certainly see that as a direction we'll be coming back on.
Last one, Chris, and then we're moving on.
That's very kind of you, Lucy. I've listened to this debate with some interest and a little bit of amusement on occasion. The first thing is, I don't believe that it's appropriate for this council, nor for that matter for local government generally, to look to be at the cutting edge of advances in AI technology. I don't believe that local government has the risk appetite, nor the skills, nor the political ability, and that's not a party political issue. I don't believe we've got the ability to be at the cutting edge of a transformative technology such as AI. And that's not to say that we don't take use of things and we don't adopt things and we don't copy other people, but let's not get excited about the idea that we need to be at the cutting edge of a change of technology, especially a change of technology such as this, which is not merely transformational, but likely to be paradigmic in its change. And look back at previous paradigmic changes and just see how disruptive they were, how necessary, of course, they were, and how advantageous they were ultimately, but just how disruptive they were. And just look back: printing, electricity, the internal combustion engine, computers. And there's actually quite a bit we can learn by looking back at past changes in paradigms and consider, well, just what are the challenges and opportunities and threats and dangers that we need to be aware of so far as AI is concerned. And ultimately, I have to say that I think that the opportunities that AI produces will be significantly greater than all of those which have been mentioned here so far today. And unfortunately, we are limited both in terms of our technical ability, our ability to see into the future, because no one before the invention of printing understood what that would end up creating, and it wasn't all necessarily good, especially in the first 100 or 200 years, and just what we should be doing. And our limited life that we've got in front of us does also limit our appetite in some ways to explore some of these things. And I do respectfully disagree with Councillor Machini when she says that she doesn't want to see local government reorganisation being an element of every single paper we have in front of us coming forward. I believe it probably needs to be one of those things which is ticked off on every single paper we have coming before us in future. But despite the fact that this will be a disruptive technology, I don't believe that we should be afraid to utilise it where it's proven externally to work. I wouldn't want us to take risks on things which are unproven, but already enough is proven for us not to be afraid to move forwards and take those things. We may not go quite so far as to disprove what Councillor Slatter said, and Councillor Slatter made a distinction which she seemed to regard as being axiomatic, that AI wouldn't, for example, be involved in the creation of policy. AI ultimately has the potential to set policy. And I know that we as councillors may not like to think about that, but ultimately that is a distinct possibility in the long term. Not, however, within the next 3 years, that's for sure. But let's not be limited in our thoughts about what AI could produce, but let's not be overambitious in what it can produce, especially in the short term.
Thank you. Again, I think it's been a very constructive debate. I don't think I've heard anybody speak against any of the recommendations. I want to thank you very much, Tim, for coming with your first presentation to this committee. It's a very important one, and I think that as we move forward with many challenges which this council faces, we will have to make sure that we are using the opportunities of new digital technologies at every decision point to the maximum effect. And that's going to be different in every different area across the council, and will depend sometimes on the teams who are leading it and what their capacity is as well. But it's exciting to have this paper, and we will look forward to the future reports with all their lovely examples and just a few off the wall, really cutting edge things for Councillor Cant. Thank you very much indeed. And Michelle, are you happy that we accept those recommendations? Good. And then we will move on to item 6, the corporate risk register, which is Mairead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to apologise to the committee and note that I have a watery eye today. So if it appears that I'm crying about the corporate risk register, that is not the case. So this is our regular update report on the corporate risk register. and risk management activity following on from our previous report in October. You'll find the full corporate risk register as Appendix 1, and Table 1 provides an overview of the register. In particular, some key changes to highlight. Firstly, that risk 6, which is the risk that the council's workforce is not able to meet business need, has reduced in score. So that's gone from a 15 to a 10, following an overall improvement in recruitment outcomes across the council. Then there is also a new risk, risk 13, which has been escalated to the corporate risk register from the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate. The risk is the risk that arrangements to support people with learning disabilities result in poor outcomes due to uncertainty of decoupling of funding arrangements via the Section 75 agreement. And it is currently scored at 16, which is in excess of the council's risk appetite. There is a summary of the background to the risk and current arrangements to manage the risk at section 3.4 of the report, and you will see the current draft of the risk at the end of the risk register. Other key elements of the report include an update on risk management approach, apologies to local government reorganisation at section 4.2, a risk management action from the external audit value for money opinion 2023 to 24 at section 4.3, and an update on the implementation of the corporate risk strategy at section 4.4. And I'm particularly pleased to note that that includes the news our new corporate risk manager has just started in post and is currently conducting a review of our risk management arrangements to inform a refresh of that strategy, which will come forward alongside our annual risk report to the July meeting of the committee. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mairead. I think Stephen wants to come in with a small comment, and then I've got Chris and then Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I'm conscious Mairead is presenting the overall corporate risk register, but I wanted to highlight the proposed escalation of the learning disability related risk, which Mairead has set out in the report. I wanted to just reassure members that in considering this for formal escalation in addition to the corporate risk register, this was reviewed first by the corporate leadership team quarterly risk and assurance meeting that I chair, and has subsequently been discussed and debated by the Adults and Health Committee as well during the course of the last week. I have to say, in terms of this risk coming forward for addition to the corporate risk register, I just want to be clear that from the County Council's perspective, our focus has to be about sustainable, effective and supportive learning disability services and support for individuals who need the County Council services. That's been our absolute focus throughout, and we will ensure that there is a safe transition for the service users we are supporting from the 1st of April with the cessation of the current pooled budget and partnership arrangements with the NHS. I have to say, Chair, I think it's disappointing we find ourselves in this situation. County Council officers and indeed County Council members, where possible, have sought throughout to try to bring the NHS to the table in a positive and constructive way to deal with the historical debt issues that we've been faced with, but really importantly with an absolute focus on providing the services needed by people who are currently supported through the Learning Disability Partnership. Unfortunately, we found ourselves in a bit of a stalemate with the NHS, so despite following the necessary escalation steps around the monies owed, as the County Council considers it to be, and that includes some historical debt, we have not been able to reach a resolution with the NHS. So in that regard, Chair, escalating the risk today is not actually just about the money. It's about ensuring that our NHS partners equally provide for the people that they will be directly responsible for supporting from 1st of April, and set those arrangements out in a transparent manner so that those service users understand what that looks like, how it will be provided, and indeed how they will fund it. Unfortunately, Chair, because of the escalation process over the financial dispute, we will from tomorrow be moving into legal mediation, having exhausted all prior steps with the Integrated Care Board for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So I guess given that tomorrow is the deadline for whether or not we move to legal mediation, from my perspective, if there is any opportunity at this 11th hour that the ICB wish to come forward and make a revised offer to settle the historical debt and payments we believe are owed, I would very much welcome that. However, Chair, I just wanted to reassure members that from our perspective, the County Council is ready for separation, has staffing in place and is clear about the people we will support and will ensure continuity of care for. So I just wanted to say that, Chair. But really importantly, I personally support this being added to the corporate risk register today. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, I'll let you come in next and then I'll come to Chris and Steve.
Thank you. Thank you both for the report and what's in the risk register, and also to the Chief Executive for what he's just said. I'll be relatively brief because we did discuss this at Adults and Health last week, but I think it's important to put on record some points. I also want to say at the start my thanks to Councillor Bowden, who is the opposition spokes in our committee, and we have an absolutely cross-party view on this, on the Council's position, and I thank him for all our discussions and cooperation together. I'm sure he'll speak as well. The first point is to say is that our officers have been negotiating in good faith for months and years. Councillor Van der Ven, my Vice Chair, myself have been consistently briefed about that. We've consistently met at board level with our Integrated Care Board, opposite numbers, including its Chair, John O'Brien, discussions that have always taken place in good spirit and good faith. And it's a source of deep misery that we've got to this situation. It should have been avoided. We have to place on record that we've done everything to seek to avoid it and to keep this as an integrated service, and a deep regret that we've got to the stage that we are. There was an agreed funding share between the County Council and the Integrated Care Board, the local health service partner, on who pays what for an integrated service. The team was managed by us on behalf of both, and they didn't pay their bills. And at some point, in the interest of the budget of this council and the council taxpayers of Cambridgeshire, and also the legality that we cannot, as a social care authority, make healthcare provision at our own expense, which is legally the responsibility of the health service, we could not allow that to go on longer. And the Chief Executive has talked about the mediator now. It's important to recall that for 2 years in the discussions between officers of our authority and theirs, they couldn't agree a mediator. 2 years of meetings where they couldn't agree a mediator. And of course, that wasn't about the person, it was about the terms of reference they were appointed under, and the fact that the Integrated Care Board, in our view, was putting financial savings at the expense of what we believe to be the legal obligations we both have towards people with learning disabilities. It's important to place on record that we have previously escalated this to NHS England, with thanks to the Chief Executive who was responsible for that. And when that happened, the health service did partially pay their bill. And so these escalation measures, whilst extremely unwelcome and souring, nevertheless are there for a purpose. And that's why it's right that we go through the escalation procedure now. As we said last week, and I hope we'll say again today, to people with learning disabilities and their families, your social care is totally assured. We have a team there up and running. It will continue to run. We have existing relationships with our service users. All of that will continue, and there will be complete continuity from us as a social care authority to uphold our obligations. Our service is fully funded, and we will fulfill all of our obligations. But as we meet today, 3 weeks before this is going to happen, we do not know from the National Health Service who is going to be doing the assessments, who is going to be taking the decisions, and who is going to be providing the services for the healthcare funded support to people with learning disabilities, many of whom receive joint services and should continue to reach joint services that partially we fund and partially are funded by the health service. And I am very, very worried that people will lose their services. They won't know who to blame. And that's why it's very important that we try still to resolve this issue to the very best of our ability, because in the end, it's about the lives of some very important people in our community. So we should appeal again today to the NHS partners that they should be transparent about what the arrangements will be from the 1st of April onwards. You haven't got much time, not just to tell us, but to tell people with learning disabilities and their families yourselves. And as the chief executive of the Integrated Care Board told me in October, they were prepared to consider making some transitional funding available to maintain existing services until the new service was fully established. That's never been followed up. It's still, they're working on their budget. I know they've got tight budgets, but heaven's sake, so have we, right? They should make an interim amount of money available, which is, to use the word we've just used, a safety net, so people don't lose their services in the short term whilst our health partners get their act together. And I appeal to them again to do that. 2 final points. Integration of health and care is inevitable. It's desirable. It is the future. And so for us to be disintegrating a service that has been operating pretty well is extremely, extremely deplorable. And the fact that we've been forced to do it is a short-term necessity against a long-term trend that we must still fight for. And that's why in the previous debate earlier on digital, and in this debate again, we must try still to keep the very best of spirits with our health partners. We must still look at cooperation, which we do have in many other areas. We should recognise, as a meeting last Friday of our Health and Wellbeing Board showed with external LGA consultants, that there's much that is good in our relationship. And we've got to get over what is a short-term blip, a very unwelcome one, and make sure that we keep on track to long-term integration. And finally, this. The health service could do a deal today and they could do it tomorrow. I think the sides are not far apart. It would be far better a deal was done and we just get on with delivering the service rather than argue over money. I know our chief executive, who has briefed me personally, is entering into those negotiations in good faith and with the right degree of flexibility that I'm sure members of this council would want to see, but with also his duty to preserve the legality and funding obligations that sit on his and our shoulders. But I hope that we can resolve this now. The clock is ticking. 3 weeks isn't very long at all. And we should be putting the needs and interests of people with learning disabilities first, not a spat over funding.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is extremely depressing and irritating that we're in this position that we are, but I know all the work that's gone in over many, many, many months and years. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I think I'd better just restrict myself at this point to talk about the LDB funding issue, because I think it's really important that I follow up the comments which have been made by the Chief Executive and by Richard. I first became involved in this issue 6 years ago as the Vice Chairman of the Old Adults Committee. And even back then, it was clear that something had gone wrong in terms of the allocation of costs between social care and health. And while some of the issues which there were 6 years ago have been resolved, the overall issue has not been resolved, and we find ourselves in this sorry position now. As far as I'm concerned, what should be key to this, as far as the NHS is concerned, quite apart from us, it should be the continuing care of vulnerable individuals. And as far as the NHS is concerned, the continuing health care of vulnerable individuals. And what I fail to understand is how what the NHS is doing, what the ICB is doing, is consistent with what is meant to be the underlying purpose of the NHS and their underlying core belief, which is to put patients at the heart of all decision making. And that just doesn't seem to have taken place here. I don't understand why it hasn't, and I would urge the ICB to think again about their patients, and particularly in this case, patients who are vulnerable, and to go back to those basic principles rather than just look at this in terms of an accounting issue. Now, over that 6-year period, I've seen this issue develop, and particularly over the course of the last 4 years as I've been on the Adults and Health Committee. And I have to say, as the opposition spokesman on this area, I've got no obligation to support what this council does. So I'm not coming at this with a biased perspective and perception in terms of this council. But from what I've seen, I believe that the county council officers have been completely correct in their processes. If anything, they've been less urgent and less insistent maybe than they should have been in retrospect, given the lack of movement that we've seen from the ICB. And the CCG and then later the ICB have been quite unreasonable in the way in which they've approached all of this. It's quite appropriate, in my opinion, as is proposed here, for this LDP risk to go onto the risk register and for it to be reported to us on a regular basis. And I do support the comments which have been made both by the Chief Executive and also by Richard. And I think it is appropriate for us to escalate this matter now to get external resolution. But as many of us, especially the members around this table, are all too well aware, in less than 2 months, there's a set of local elections taking place. And none of us as members can necessarily guarantee, let alone expect, that we will be back here in 2 months' time. Alternatively, of course, there is a possibility that those of us who are on this side of the table may end up being on your side of the table, Lucy, and may be the ones who are responsible for leading this authority after May 2025. And if that is the case, I, for one, will give 100% support to the actions which have so far been taken by officers and by the Chief Executive, and will encourage that to be accelerated if necessary, because in the interests of the vulnerable individuals who need the continuity of health and social care, in those people's interest, this should not be allowed to carry on. Richard is entirely correct to say that it is a massively retrograde step for us to deintegrate the health and social care elements of the work which has been done for so many years for those people with learning disabilities. It's a massively retrograde step. And I know it's not being done with any desire whatsoever by the members of this council, nor by the officers of this council. But legally, as Richard said, legally we're left with no alternative. And I do agree with Richard, there is still time for the ICB to change their attitude on this. But I can only say that if they fail to do so, and having looked at these numbers very carefully over a long period of time, I just don't believe that the ICB are on the right side of this argument. I believe that when this is escalated, it will be resolved in favour of the social care element, and I would encourage this to be resolved quickly and responsibly by the ICB before that external resolution process gets underway. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I think we are extremely appreciative of your clarity about the complete universal support across this council for the negotiations and the work that the senior officers are doing. I think it's really important that that message is heard loud and clear. So thank you for that. Steve, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a little bit more of the same, but I've got two actual areas, and I do have a question on this one. So the first one I want to take on talk about is the one that we've just been discussing, the potential for poorer outcomes due to the the funding maybe not being there because of split the partnership and what direction that will take. And before I ask my question, I really got to support the officers, the action they're taking, support Councillor Howard in the firm message he sent out today, support Councillor Bowden in the firm message he sent out today. The only one I'd say, that I potentially agree is it took a long while to get to this point, but we are at this point, and it absolutely has my backing as well. This is the right place to be. It is such a shame that for some reason the focus has come away from the individuals, the peoples, and it's become a spat about money, because as Councillor Bowden rightly said, the patient should be at the heart of everything, or in our terms, the resident should be at the heart of everything. And what a shame, because this is better as a partnership. If I look forward to the future, one day it is anticipated, if the experiments in Manchester and elsewhere work out all right, that localities may have a centralised budget through the mayor, who will be either chair or vice chair of the ICBs. And this sort of thing should disappear then, because you won't have the, you shouldn't have the different organisations. You should have a central pot where everybody works together to achieve an outcome, rather than saying this is my money, you can't touch it, this is your money, I do want it. So anyway, very happy with that. So I'm going to move away from that, and it has become about the finance, and I'm going to ask a question out of naivety and help me understand this a bit more, because I normally concentrate on the financial element and the risk associated for that, but in this area I'm not as skilled as other people. I'm hoping that somebody could help me with this. I understand that, so at the moment we have a joint funding arrangement, and there's the reason there's a joint funding arrangement for the benefit of those not quite, like myself, not really used to this, is because there is an element of care that should be provided by the NHS in terms of healthcare, and there's an element of social care that gets provided by us. Now, at the moment, the care is delivered in a coordinated way between us, and there's a money split, and it's coordinated. Now, when we stop splitting the money, I'm not quite sure, and I think Councillor Howard helped me some of that journey. I'm not quite sure why it may result in poorer outcomes. That bit I don't get, because what would happen is the NHS then provide their bit and pay for their bit, and we provide our bit and pay for our bit. And if we both still do our jobs, why is there going to be a poorer outcome, which is the wording of the risk? So it's the wording, how do I get to that? Understand that. So it might be useful to give me a personal journey, a made up, a fictitious personal journey example of a potential poorer outcome because of this change that I could understand. So that is a point of naivety. The second one that I'd like to ask the officer about is the other one that's changed, which is the business one about staffing. And so that is on page 125. I'll just make sure I read it out correctly and get the right one. So this is risk number 6. So this is the council's workforce is not able to meet business need. And this has gone from a previous score of 15 down to a current score of 10. I can see what the previous score was, and I can see what the risk appetite was, which was 15, and I can see the current score is 10. I can't see on the grid, if you understand what I mean, how we achieved 15 before. Was it 3 times 5 or 5 times 3? And there's a difference, but I'm going to jump to the conclusion it's the same as the risk appetite and was a consequence of 3 and a likelihood of 5. And now it's a consequence of 2 and a likelihood of 5. So on that particular one, what I don't understand is this. This is the council's workforce is not able to meet business need. So if we have a lack of a workforce or shortages in the workforce, then there will be a consequence, and we can't meet the business needs. So I get that. So that was scored. But it's not been explained why the consequence, if I understand it correctly, has lowered. I mean, surely if we don't have sufficient workforce, why has the consequence lowered? If we suddenly had less likelihood of not being able to recruit, then it would be the likelihood that's changed. But why is if I'm reading this right, why is the consequence, or is it the likelihood has changed? If the likelihood has changed, i.e. we are able to recruit better, why am I still being continued told? In fact, our business plan included stuff for the fact that we have staff shortages. There's a paper going to full council next week about our international recruitment. So which is it? And what was the discussions that led to this being lowered? Because I can only see that it's been discussed and lowered. I cannot discover why it's been lowered. If it has been lowered, there is also a secondary point about risk and the appetite for risk. We set an appetite for risk because there is cost. If you want everything green, it's real, we want everything green, no risk at all. It can be achieved in many cases, but there's a huge cost to that. So we're now, according to this, spending more than we want to, than we will accept in this area, would be my inference from what this change has meant. So 2 questions there around that one. And the first one was a personal journey, might help me understand that a bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Stephen's going to reply on this one because it's complicated. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Counts. I will start with the learning disability piece, and what I may do is plead the Fifth Amendment at some point and refer to the Executive Director for Adult Health and Commissioning, so I may provide you with a written note outside the meeting as well. But on that basis, what is the potential risk around poorer outcomes or indeed poorer services where we separate the existing joint arrangements whereby we have a Section 75 pooled budget between the County Council and the NHS, and we also have a single integrated team that delivers learning disability services at present, which sits within the County Council. Effectively, I would say the gap arises from splitting the teams. The County Council's part of the partnership will look after the social care aspects of provision, and the NHS will be required to look after the NHS aspects of provision. At the moment, with the current integrated partnership, an individual could have both health needs and social care needs, but because they receive them through one single integrated partnership team, that ensures no double handling, no complexity for the service user or their carers in accessing the services because they only have to go to one point. Whereas in future with the separation, if we have an individual who has both social care support and NHS support, they'll have to do effectively two sets of conversations with different providers. That break in conversation being through one point potentially creates a risk of poorer outcomes because service users may be, or indeed carers that support them, may be unable to access the necessary support, information and advice. They may be unable to direct the support they need from the NHS and the council at the same time and as an effective way. So I guess what I'm saying is the separation creates an unnecessary bureaucracy and complication, which could inadvertently lead to worse outcomes for individuals because their ability to navigate the system between both the NHS and the council will become more complex, not less complex. The current arrangements are clearly much simpler for service users and their supporters and families at present. Unfortunately, this is going to make that much more complex. So that's my attempt to explain why there could be poorer outcomes because the complexity could lead to gaps. So I hope that's helpful, Councillor Count, but I can clearly get Patrick Warren-Higgs to provide us a further note on that. So, Chair, perhaps if I pause there before we come to the workforce issues.
Yeah, thank you for that. Without a personal journey in there, that really cleared it up for me and helped, and the public, I think, as well, helped to explain to them exactly what was at stake here. And I can see, particularly as we're talking about learning support here, individuals being their lives unnecessarily overcomplicated and perhaps mixed signals going back to two different teams. So I really appreciated that explanation. It's clarified for me a lot. Thank you.
Yes, Richard.
I'll be very short because I know I spoke at length before. Thank you to the Chief Executive for what he said. I would add to that, if the health service is saying it shouldn't be paying the amount it is today, but the services are at a level that they are today, when they're separated, they're going to have to cut services to people to reflect their view of the financial contribution they should be making. If you have a hospital closure or a nursing home closure, everyone sees it and people can take their own view about it, protest about it and the rest of it. What's going to happen instead, if the health service keeps to its current budget forecast on its view, is that as each case is reassessed case by case over weeks and months, people are going to lose services. They're going to lose community nurses coming into their home. They're going to lose stays at nursing homes for respite care and other factors. But because it won't be done in one big bang that people can see, those cuts will take place in a way that is personal to the person and their family and not really visible and transparent to the rest of us. But unless the health service make a financial commitment, which is why that was part of what I asked for, those cuts will happen. And that's in addition to what the Chief Executive has talked about this morning.
Thank you for that clarity. I'm going to let Stephen carry on with talking about okay, thank you, with the workforce issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So coming back to Councillor Count on the workforce risk and the change in scoring, just to clarify for the benefit committee, the likelihood of the risk is the score that has changed since last time. That's reduced from a 3 to a 2. At the last meeting of the Corporate Leadership Team Risk and Assurance Group, there was actually a meeting in February and than previously in November, where this has been discussed in some depth. So what we're actually seeing, and the reason that Janet Atkin, as our Service Director for HR, proposed the reduction in likelihood, is that not only is recruitment data telling us that we're now filling more posts successfully, we're also getting retention information and exit interview information that suggests that the risk, or at least the likelihood of the risk, has reduced. I think the problem with the way this risk sits is it's, of course, covering the entirety of the council's workforce in one risk. If I look at the subsets to that, for example, in children's social care, we know there's a higher level of risk for qualified children's social workers. By contrast, in adult social care, because of the workforce framework that they have been implementing for some time, we are seeing that risk has reduced significantly. For example, the appointment of 20 adult social care workforce bursary placements during the course of the last 12 months has been a significant ability to help reduce the risk. So, Councillor Count, I suppose my answer would be to refer you in part to the comments that are outlined in the report, and if I can find the right paragraph, in paragraph 332, there are some of those explanations outlined, but I would just make the point that listening to and having the detailed debate of the corporate leadership team risk and assurance meeting, one of the things I was keen to see from risk owners, and this is a broader point rather than just to this one specifically, is that risk scores are being managed more dynamically. And I think we've previously seen in many of the corporate risk scores, they've been static for some time. Now, I would imagine it would be reasonable of me to forecast to say that whilst the risk may have come down right now based on the overall position of the council's ability to recruit, retain and develop individuals, we would expect that risk will probably go back up again in the future if we align it to that horrible three-letter abbreviation that we talk about in every report today, LGR. So I anticipate we will see this risk rise again, but at the moment, given where we are right now, we are seeing the council's ability to recruit, retain and develop staff has improved substantially. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges, but it means it's more managed and the impact is perhaps lower than it was. I hope that explanation is helpful, but again, very happy to invite the Service Director for Human Resources to provide a fuller note if members would find that helpful. Thank you.
I'll come back to Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. It would be useful in the background, perhaps email circulation to perhaps tell us what the vacancy factors are in the various areas that are of concern, or you know, that something like that. But also there may be a financial implication here because we have significant vacancy factor factored into the budget for next year. And obviously, if all the posts are filled, I'm not suggesting all the posts will be filled, but obviously significant number more than was predicted would be filled. There'll be an impact on the budget, and it'd be interesting to see whether that's of concern at the moment, or whether there's significant enough headroom for that to not to be a concern.
Chair, very happy to pick up that briefing note through Janet Atkin as requested. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got 3 people still to speak on this, and I'm aware that we're over time for, I think you're one of them, Chris. We're over time for this item. Michelle, do you want us to have a 5-minute break now? Or yes, fine. We'll have a 5-minute break and we'll come back. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I can tick one person off my list as a result of the short break, so that's very helpful. Mark, you're next.
Yeah, well, hopefully mine's a quite quick one, but it is a mechanical question on the measurement. If we can look at risk 8, please, Mairead. My question is that having read the triggers, well, I haven't read the whole report, but particularly the consequences, the likelihood of a council having a serious cyber crime, the word serious isn't in the word, but it just says cyber crime, is deemed to be at the maximum, and our risk appetite is deemed to be quite a bit lower than that. But the fact that they've not gone into a red square means we haven't got a lot of dialogue about it. And I'm just wondering whether, is this a quirk of the system? Because when I read the potential consequences, they're all quite dire. And if you go through the controls, there's some comfort in what I read in the controls, but I'm just wondering whether, should we perhaps have a closer look at separation from our risk appetite when they're not in the red zone? Does that make sense?
Sort of, but Mairead will be able to say whether it makes sense to her.
Thank you. So the risk appetite is set as standard on the system as a 15, which is a likelihood of 3 and a consequence of 5. However, that is a quirk of the visual representation on the system. So essentially, we would say that the maximum risk appetite is a 15, configured in either way, if that makes sense. In terms of the reasons why this specific risk, you see the reduced consequence, but the high likelihood, that is because we know that the council is targeted on a regular basis by cyber criminals, similar to many other organisations across both the private sector and the public sector. So the focus of mitigation for this risk is to reduce the likelihood of, the consequence when we are targeted, as we are likely to be, through a range of measures, which include, basic things like our firewalls, our controls around where connections can be made to our intranet, things like, the training that we provide on a mandatory basis to our officers. And so the focus of mitigation for this risk is about reducing the consequence, because we know that it is likely that we will be targeted by cyber criminals. Does that answer the question?
If I back through you, Chair. Yeah, I think it does, Mairead. I think it does. It's not in any other risk, because I went through and double checked them. And but I'll leave it there for future, but I think we should perhaps review more than 3 or 4 steps away from the risk assessment, because that to me says that, I don't know, it just seems there's something not quite right about this. I'm happy to leave it there, and you've given a very good explanation. I'm not sure it's a comprehensive one, if I can be blunt.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got 2 quite separate questions, if I may. The first is, I'm afraid Richard has maybe inadvertently misled me over the last couple of meetings of the Adults and Health Committee, because as he alluded to in an earlier agenda item today, we've had matters coming up with contracts and procurements going on for 7 or 10 years. And I have raised at the Adults Committee the need for us to have some consideration as to the disaggregation which may need to be considered in that process as a result of local government reorganisation. And Richard extremely politely and quite correctly has said it's not just a matter for adults and health, it's a matter for the whole council, and therefore strategy, resources and performance is the right place at which this will be raised. And I accept the logic of what he says, and whilst we have still more than 3 years to go, those 3 years will go remarkably quickly, and we are continuing to make decisions now without even giving consideration to the implications of LGR and the way in which we will have, among other things, disaggregation of some of these contracts and some of these procurement processes which we are undertaking now. So I was rather disappointed when I came to see today's meeting and saw the agenda, and saw in particular paragraph 4.2 of this report talking about the local government reorganisation, that it's pointed out that there was a meeting that held of CLT on the 21st of February, And that's basically it. We're given no further really useful information about how this will proceed. And I think it needs to proceed with some degree of alacrity. Now, we are told, and I was very pleased to read it, that it's noted that there needs to be a reassessment of the current risk registers and action plans to mitigate risk. So I'm pleased about that, and that a range of updates to the corporate risk register were discussed and agreed. That's excellent, but this needs to be brought to this committee, Lucy, and needs to be instituted as soon as we reasonably can. So my first question on that is really, when will that happen? Can we have an assurance that that will happen? And I do appreciate we've got a meeting, a full council next week, which we've got to get through. But can we have an assurance that we will get a substantial report on this and substantial progress at the next meeting of the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee, so that we can get what Councillor Howard was saying earlier, the need for service and policy committees to get very clear guidance from the centre, from this committee, from officers about the way in which we need to integrate consideration of CGR into all the reports we have in future.
I'm going to come to Stephen, but I also have opinions on this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Bowden. In terms of the assurance you're seeking, I can give that assurance that the work on the risk registers is underway. In fact, some of the members of the corporate leadership team were just checking that with me yesterday when there was a debate around local government reorganisation within the management team, looking at some of these very aspects and making sure they were more familiar with some of the risk areas so that they could take that into account, reframing their own risk registers and then revisiting the corporate risk register content as well. So yes, happy to give that assurance. The work is underway and it is underway at pace, so I can give that assurance. As to a report to the next meeting of Strategy, Resources and Performance, clearly there is a meeting of this committee in a different vein this afternoon, so it won't be coming forward then. I would want to defer to the Chair before I give a commitment on adding something to the forward plan, however. Thank you.
Thank you. So we had a discussion at our last meeting about whether we put something on the agenda for this meeting. And I asked Michelle about it when we were doing the preparation for this meeting. And in the minutes for the last meeting, there was a note which was that it would be on the agenda if it was felt it was necessary. And I think in many ways, I would absolutely justify the fact that given that we have the report coming to council next week, we didn't need to have a full discussion about it at this committee this time. It's extremely difficult to know whether or not it will be necessary to have it on the agenda next time. It is likely, but it depends on what the pace of local government reorganisation work has been, given elections and all sorts of other things in between. I'm quite content that we should put it on the agenda plan. I think that's a reasonable request. I think it's a slightly strange time to do it in the middle of the risk register discussion. So maybe we'll come back to that when we talk about the agenda plan. But I think it is hard to know at this point exactly when we will need to have full discussions about local government reorganisation. More information comes out all the time on it from different places, and the more of that information we have, the more useful our discussion can be. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Lucy.
Sorry, Stephen
sorry.
wants to come in again.
Sorry, Chair, sorry to Councillor Bowden. Just one further comment. Obviously, subject to debate and discussion at full council next week, there is a proposed working group in respect of local government reorganisation where we would obviously have some substantive debate about relevant issues there and taking forward proposals both from the County Council and indeed potentially other local authorities within our area. I would, however, like to reserve the right to bring reports to Strategy, Resources and Performance as necessary, but I think echoing the Chair's remarks, difficult to foresee exactly when that would be required. But I think the previous debate at the last meeting of this committee was as and when required if members are agreeable to that. So I'm very happy to keep that under dynamic review depending on where we get to, and very much recognise the purview of this committee, particularly as our committee of committees, if you like, as well. So hope that's helpful, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank both you, Lucy, and Stephen for those comments. I think that I was particularly interested in the review of the current risk registers so far as CGR is concerned. Sorry, as far as the local government reform is concerned. And I do hope that something is going to be able to come forward in the reasonably near future, because it is correct. It should be regarded as there being one, in fact, more than one strategic risks that we are facing in this. And it's appropriate for this committee, and for that matter, for our Audit and Accounts Committee, to have reports come to them so that some element of scrutiny of how we are dealing with those risks takes place. So far as the speed of travel is concerned, I fear, Lucy, that if we were to wait until we were certain what was going to happen, we wouldn't be doing anything at all until about one day before local government reorganisation takes place. And we can only act on the basis of the information we so far have and our assessment of the likelihood that government is actually going to go ahead with what it is proposing. My feeling, and it's only a feeling, is that it is pretty certain that government is going to go ahead with what they are proposing. But one can never tell with government, so it's possible that will not be the case. But it's prudent for us to assume that they are going to go ahead. And if they are going to go ahead, then that advice that that Richard was asking about earlier in the meeting to service committees and policy committees about how we should consider local government reorganisation is relevant, because decisions being made now will affect the ease of the transition from our current arrangements to whatever future arrangements we may have. So the earlier we have such guidance, the earlier we have such consideration, and the earlier, in my opinion, that we have an item included on our checklist of items for each individual paper, ensuring that LGR has been taken into consideration, the sooner we have that, in my opinion, the better. But I wait to see what it is that is decided will be brought forward. And of course, we wait to see what full council decides next week.
Thank you. Noted.
I had a second.
Sorry.
Sorry. Would you,
That's fine. Second question.
My second question is a quite different one. It's one I have mentioned before, but I'm a bit disappointed to see what I continue to see. Now, we often say about risk registers and what we see here, that the whole risk management process is a bit like a pyramid. And there's an awfully large base that we as members never actually really get to see at all. We only get to see what might be called the pyramidion or the capstone. We see the very top of the pyramid, and we get to comment on what we see at the very top. So I don't know the extent to which what we are seeing at the very top necessarily reflects everything which there is lower down in the pyramid, where the engine room is of the risk management process. And I'd like some assurance that my suspicion is wrong, or confirmation that my fears are correct, because what we continue to see in what is presented to us is and continues to be in the conversations that we have, in the discussions that we have, is, in my opinion, a misunderstanding of what risk registers are about and what the evaluation of risk is about. In the old-fashioned way of doing things, which we ourselves followed until fairly recently, it has to be said, risk is always seen as a negative thing, and risk management didn't really exist. It was risk avoidance, which was the overriding consideration. Now, that is an old-fashioned way of looking at it. We've gone beyond that in terms of our policy now, so we now look at risk management. And risk management doesn't mean avoiding risk. It means literally managing risk. And for that, as long as we have the fairly simplistic targeting system that we've got at the moment, and measurement system that we've got at the moment with the simple 5x5 analysis of likelihood and consequence, we set a risk appetite. However, we continue at our level, at the capstone level, to see this risk appetite as being the same for every single risk. And there needs to be a point at which we start recognizing that we have, or should have, a different risk appetite for each risk, or at least we should separately analyze what our risk appetite is. And we haven't yet done so in terms of what we're seeing at the top. I wonder the extent to which, at lower levels of the risk management process, at the working side of it, that there has been some movement in this towards changing from having one single risk appetite number for every single risk to a more nuanced position where we have different risk appetites for different risks. And ultimately, what we see at the top of the capstone has to reflect what there is underneath. We can't just institute this at the top. It doesn't work like that at all. What we're seeing here is a result of everything that there is underneath. So I accept you can't do it all at once, and you certainly can't do it from the top. But from the top, I'm really disappointed on the climate side to see an extra item which is in the information that we've been provided, where a target has been put. And I'm sorry, that just doesn't understand what risk management is meant to be. It doesn't appreciate what our risk appetite is. And I think that we need really carefully to consider, are we really producing this information in line with the policy that we adopted in the last couple of years about really having risk management here rather than risk avoidance? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, before you reply, may I come in because it was on the same subject
Yes,
that
you
I
may.
wanted to come
Yeah,
in.
absolutely.
Thank you very much, and apologies to the committee, but I spoke erroneously earlier on, and the debate from other sections helped point that out. And it's on this very subject, because when I spoke about risk appetite earlier on and the where we were against it, I in error was thinking about actually what is a target. Perhaps wrongly worded elsewhere, where you actually decide on each particular risk what you're prepared to afford and what the consequences are. And I realised during the debate, and it's actually in the papers, risk appetite is the single number that we don't want anything to go over. If we do, we take more emergency action, if you see what I mean. So it's unhelpful to have the name risk appetite, because it kind of says, oh, I can bite that chunk, you know, but I can't bite anymore. And it's also unhelpful to have the target one, but literally a recognition of where we should be on each individual risk. Like you've set a target, which needs to be perhaps risk management, I don't know, different words, would be more helpful, and just the wording RA for the whole lot, not in the grid. Because again, in the Councillor Goldsack's comment, RA 5 times 3, actually that's erroneous. It could be 3 times 5. Do you see what I mean? We don't need that one in the table. What we want is the one where the organisation wants to land, because that reflects the cost base that I was talking about. So same subject, and just some additional information. As you're revising it, perhaps we could change it in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mairead.
Thank you. So just to give some additional context and assurance to members in terms of the work that has been going on around risk appetite. So back in last year in 2024, we had a couple of sessions with CLT to look at the council's risk appetite. And the outcomes of that were discussions around recognising that the score of 16 should be treated as, rather than a risk appetite, the maximum tolerable risk position. So the maximum level of risk with which the organisation is willing to operate. And then we also discussed and agreed some risk statements which set out the optimal risk position, i.e. the level of risk with which the organisation aims to operate in each of our areas of principal risk. So that cuts across not necessarily aligned to the individual risks currently on the corporate risk register, but risk areas, and therefore a risk of a particular nature would fall within a particular set risk appetite. So for example, to make that slightly clearer, it's sort of a safeguarding type risk, having its own set optimal risk position, compared to a commercial and contract type risk having a different optimal risk position. Now, my intention would be to bring forward some probably refreshed wording into the risk management policy, which will come before this committee in June, which is when we typically update our risk management policies and procedures. And I would also note that we do now have a risk manager in post, which is going to really assist us in terms of our ability to bring forward some of these changes a little bit more rapidly in future. But there has been work done on this in the background, and the committee should be in a position to see more of the outputs of that work when we next bring that risk management policy in, I think, June.
Stephen.
Chair, just very briefly. So if Councillor Bowden will forgive me for mixing metaphors around engine rooms and capstones, if I look at the County Council's risk management toolkit, which Mairead, so the operational end, which Mairead is referring to in some ways, the risk appetite statements that she's outlined for things like legal and regulatory, financial, safeguarding, service provision, they are set out as descriptive terms. And there is a very clear point that says that appetite for risk will vary according to the activity undertaken. So there is, to my mind, a greater degree of nuance than you see at this level. But Mairead is right. I think there's an opportunity for us to reflect that in the annual refresh of the risk management policy, which comes forward in June, both to strategy, resources and performance, and then onwards to audit and accounts. So I think the feedback is really helpful. Perhaps what we need to ensure is at this level, members are reassured that the operational end is doing that nuance. So I'm comfortable that based on our risk management toolkit and some of the deep dive activity that we do into individual service risk registers at CLT, we do see that evidence. But I think it needs to be made more transparent at this level. So happy to take that as part of the policy review for this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen some nods, so that's encouraging. Thank you. Again, I think there's been a really thorough debate on this item, but I haven't heard anybody want to make any changes to the paper. So if we are content to, I can't remember if this one's to note or agree, but anyway, to accept it, and thank you for your comments, and thank you very much for all the work that goes into it, Mairead. And I know it is something that we take a great interest in, as it's extremely important for this council. So thank you very much. Good. Thank you very much. We will move on to item 7, which is the Corporate Services Performance Report, which is Sue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, committee. So you have the performance report for this committee for October to December 2024, so Q3. And just to say, this is the last report you'll see in the current format. You'll recall that we agreed a refreshed performance management framework last October. And since that time, directorates across the council have been working to develop their balanced scorecards. And this includes a refresh of the strategic key performance indicators that will be reported to each policy and service committee. And those refreshed indicators, strategic indicators, have now been considered by those committees. So when you see the Q4 performance report to this committee, it will be in the new format, and we will be putting the Q4 information together in the form of an annual report of performance across the council for the whole of the financial year 2024-25. So that will be coming forward in June. For today's report, I'm pleased to say that we've got no red indicators, and the freedom of information indicator has now moved from red to amber this quarter as a result of the actions that have been taken by the Information Governance Service that have been reported previously to this committee. Apart from that, happy to take any questions on either the report or the attached appendix. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and particular congratulations on the no red indicators. That's good news. Any questions on this one? I don't see any. Chris.
I'm sorry, Lucy. I was intrigued, although it wasn't highlighted in this report, but I was intrigued by the comments made about council website quality and accessibility, particularly quality. And I tried to get some information about this from external sources, and was rather stymied because whilst I remembered that the local government organisation had produced a table of websites for all councils. I hadn't realised there was as far back as 2017 when they did that. And they analysed them all based on accessibility, based on a whole host of different things, and then they ranked them. And I hadn't actually seen any substantial update to that, which is really useful since. But I was interested to see what work had been done last year in terms of the average response time that there is for websites. Just how many milliseconds does it take for there to be a response? And I was just wondering, where do we stand on that? Do we know what our average response time is for our website? Because according to the report produced by an organisation called Acquia last year, on average, UK council websites had an average response time of 355 milliseconds. I was just wondering, do we know what our response time is?
my simple answer to your last question is no, I don't, but I'll take that question away. But the point about the accessibility score and the league table and the actual piece of software that is used to both scan our site and look at the quality, and also the accessibility in relation to the legislation that's been recently passed, perhaps if we can put a briefing note together on that, if that would be helpful. If you tried to search out information on that and not found it, we can put a briefing note together on that, and also answer your question around the speediness of our response if we have that data. Thank you.
That would be extremely helpful. Thank you, Lucy. I do very much differentiate, as I know the director did, between the accessibility assessment and the quality assessment. And those are two very different things. The accessibility assessment is important, if only because it's a legal requirement that we meet. But the quality one, which has to be rather more subjective, I have to say, is just interesting. And I have no idea whether we rank in the top 10%, the bottom 10%, or somewhere in between.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sue. That would be helpful. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to pass on my congratulations, Sue, on Indicator 183. It's the percentage of subject access requests. You've hit green. You've got to 90%. It's exactly the target. It's been a long time coming, and I've been the first to, I wouldn't say beat up officers over it regularly. That's the wrong term, but I've been drawing attention to this for a long while, and I'm glad that the progress has got you to target. Let's see if we can keep it there, maintain it there, and obviously pass on the thanks of this committee to the team as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, really important and really helpful. I don't see any other comments on this. So thank you very much, Sue. Congratulations on having a number of indicators which have been problematic for some time are now achieving what they should be. So that's really good news. And please pass on congratulations to all of the team as well. Excellent. I think we have noted that as required, and we'll move on to item 8, which is the committee agenda plan and training plan and appointments to outside bodies. Michelle.
Just one amendment to the agenda plan. The item on blue badges has been taken off because that doesn't need to come to committee now.
And Lucy, were we going to add to that agenda plan the LGR matter that we talked about earlier?
I think that would be sensible to put it on the agenda. I think it is possible that our next meeting in June may not be a good time for it to come. It is quite possible it will be. But if we have it on the agenda plan, we can either take it in June or September. And if it doesn't come in June, it will definitely need to come in September. So let's see how we get on with that and what's going on in the wonderful world of local government reorganisation. Okay. Thank you very much. We have noted the agenda plan and the training plan, and that concludes today's business. And I now declare this meeting closed. And I look forward to seeing quite a lot of you this afternoon. Thank you.